Colin usefully brought up global warming, which is apt for our next speaker, who is Eric Andreyko, the Vice President of Science at the Climate Corporation. We've heard a number of the speakers over the last 2 days invoke civilizational global challenges, and perhaps there is no more pressing civilizational challenge than how we are going to feed the 9.6 billion people who will be alive in 2050 on a world roiled by climate change. Eric.
That's a tall order to stave off a Malthusian dilemma with a little bit of data, but I'll see if I can do that a little bit justice. I'm going to talk about data science in agriculture, and those are two terms you may not be thinking of being together quite often, but I'm hoping to change your mind about that shortly. And I want to talk a little bit about what we do at the Climate Corporation, a company that builds digital tools for farmers, ultimately improving their sustainability and productivity through the use of data science and intelligent systems. And we do that primarily by providing useful, actionable insights to farmers directly to their mobile devices as they're going about their day making critical decisions. And we bring those insights to agricultural producers by collecting data directly from the environment, typically from a variety of different sources, either from machinery or from sensors, or publicly available data sets, such as data sets from NASA satellites, as an example. Integrate those data sets together through models that can be used to draw inferences about what is likely to happen on the farm in the future as the growing season progresses, and then delivering those insights back, in many cases directly back to a piece of farming equipment to be affected on the field. So let me tell you a little bit about how we got here in agriculture and where the role of intelligent systems applies. We are living in an increasingly digital age. I imagine that these statistics are very familiar to this audience, where we have seen an exponential decrease in the cost of storage, an exponential decrease in the cost of computation, and at the same time, and this is increasingly and especially important for agriculture, we have seen a proliferation of mobile devices. And this is especially true in the developing world. So this allows us to take computation data and deliver it directly to the edge, and including to the fields and paddies where farmers are making decisions. In addition, we have seen an increasing proliferation of sensors, and we are able to instrument our physical world in ways today which we could not have done in the past. That's the good news. The bad news is that under current trends of agricultural production increase, which are linear, when matched to growing population, which is increasing exponentially, it's not going to be good enough to stave off a pending food crisis, in the sense that if trends continue the way they are today, then the FAO estimates that we will have a shortfall in agricultural production of about 60% by 2050. So for those of you who are in the room today, that may mean slightly higher food prices, and you'll probably be all right. But for half of the world's population who lives on very limited income, it will be a serious problem. And this is driven not only by population increase, but driven in addition by growing demand for protein food sources, which increases the demand in agricultural production tremendously. So I think we can address this if we can appropriately apply intelligence to agriculture. We have seen in agriculture a few revolutions that have dramatically changed the way in which food is produced and dramatically introduced step changes in terms of how yield is increased. Green revolution, the biotech revolution, and I would argue that we're at the cusp and at the beginning days of a new revolution, the digital ag revolution, which brings data and insights to farming. And this is not a new vision. This is a very old vision, in fact. This is a cartoon from The Country Gentleman in 1931. What I love about this is that a lot of the things are right and some of the things are not. There's a beautiful flat screen that's there. There's also an interesting telephone on the desk. So some things were on par, some things were quite not. And I think the biggest thing that's missing here in this image is that I've never met a farmer who likes to sit in an office and do work. They like to be out and about. And through adoption of technology in farming, we've seen dramatic reductions in the number of farmers. Since that time that cartoon was published, we've seen a 9-to-1 reduction in the number of farmers in the United States. Simultaneously, yields increased 6x over the same period of time. So the per farmer increase in production has gone up dramatically. And farmers have adopted autonomous vehicles a long time ago. We talked about self-driving vehicles a little bit this morning. Farmers have had self-driving tractors since 2003 in the United States. And there's a huge amount of data available. There's no paucity of data with this problem. If you just look at one crop in the United States, generates billions of data points per growing season. Now, on top of this, there are some pretty substantial challenges. One of them is that while there's lots of data available, there are not a lot of growing seasons available. And a typical farmer will make about 40 meaningful decisions during the course of a growing season. And on the basis of those 40 decisions, and on the basis of weather that changes slightly from year to year, they will see one outcome. So that creates some tremendous learning challenges. And these learning challenges can be solved primarily by integrating data across farmers and integrating data across sensors and machines. And something looks a little bit like this.
Science and technology have taken us further than we ever thought possible. But there's much more ground to gain. Opportunity is everywhere. And to unlock it, we need to understand how all the factors that affect yield affect each other. We've never had more information at our fingertips or more power to enhance the way we farm. Because now, science allows us to bring vast amounts of data together, to see the connections hiding in the code, to understand the relationships between the soil, the field, and the atmosphere for every unique environment. So we can see things we've never seen and know things we've never known. So we can tap more of the potential in every seed, every acre, and every dollar we invest, and use a new level of precision in the pursuit of higher yields. The Climate Corporation is building more than innovative products. We're building an ecosystem of ag technologies that integrate, that enhance each other, that transform the future of farming.
For those of you who haven't been on a farm recently, that's what farms look like today in the developed world. And on top of this data, it's really about solving this fundamental equation. This is the conceptual equation that we need to stave off this pending food crisis. Yield is a mathematical function of the genetics of the crops, the environment they're growing in, which includes the weather and the soil and other attributes, and then what humans do to try to manage that crop, the grower practices. And if we had this equation solved, which I believe we can solve it through data science, we can do something like this, which is to optimize everything we can control to increase yield production around the world. And this can not only be used to increase yield production, but can be used to increase yield production per unit input, which can increase yield and decrease the use of natural resources simultaneously. This is not a theoretical possibility. This is not just hypothetical. We've done this. In fact, recently, the U.S. national yield average, and this was in 2014, was 172 bushels per acre. That was the highest ever. In that same year, for the same crop, a farmer in Georgia obtained 503 bushels per acre, using the same type of seed and the same type of genetics, but just different practices. And the primary difference between 172 and 503 was the amount of information and data and insights applied to make management decisions. So I believe this is obtainable. The question is, in my mind, what do we need to actually do to realize this future? If we have all of this digital technology and we have all of this data and we have the ability, as we've talked about today, to draw amazing insights and inferences on top of that data using machine learning and everything else, why have we not done this yet? And I think oftentimes we spend a lot of time talking about technology, but in my mind, it's not just about the technology. And the question is, if it's not just about the technology, what else is needed to bring about this potential future? And I think this is one good way to look at this problem. If you think about machine learning and augmented intelligence in farming, for example, you actually have this feedback cycle. You have some algorithm that is consuming vast quantities of data and turning that data into actionable insights. Those insights are then delivered to a biological entity, namely a human, who will look at what the machine is telling him to do. He will take that into account with respect to things that he understands and he has done in the past. And in many times, it's taken into account with respect to what his grandfather has done and his father has done. And they will make a decision, a human decision, one of those 40 decisions that leads to that one outcome. And by the way, if that decision is right, then maybe there will be a good year and that farmer will have income that year. And if that decision is wrong, that entire year will be wasted. And one of the only 40 paychecks the farmer gets just won't come. And then they make that decision. And then something happens from that decision to impact the growing environment of the crop. And then there's another biological system that responds, that of plants. Then we collect data either from machinery, from satellites, or from a sensor that's placed in the field and try to understand what happened and try to untangle causation in terms of what actions were performed and what outcomes were observed. And a human looks at that data and collects it and makes a bunch of decisions about which algorithm to employ, which types of machine learning methods to use, which types of models to build. And the cycle completes itself. So I think it's important to be thinking about this not only